Hey, what's up, guys? This is Michael here with the Indoor Training Center. Got a special guest with us here on the podium, Josh Peterson. You've heard from him and his dad, John, about a year ago. I was up in Wisconsin celebrating Josh's 40th birthday, and he's down here in the great state of Iowa. Joined me to celebrate my 40th. So we wanted to get together this evening, kind of just talk through a couple things, share what's on our heart. So tonight we want to talk about the idea of our journey to the 100-mile ultra marathon, a lot of branches that tie into life and faith and resilience and community. So just wanted to kind of talk through that and see where the conversation leads us. So thanks for joining us today. First time in person, right? You know, maybe it's the Asian guy in me, but got some new kit, got some new wireless microphones. So we decided to give it a whirl.
Awesome setup.
And see how it goes. So why don't you just kind of talk us through, journey to the 100-mile ultra marathon? I know our paths have crossed multiple times throughout the years, and kind of share with a little bit.
Yeah. For me, it was, kind of coming out of competitive wrestling for like 14 years. I left the academy, and I was a bum physically for like 3 or 4 years. I mean, the most physical thing I did was surfed.
Yeah.
So I got to this point where I was like, man, this is how people, this is how former athletes end up with injuries or end up just overweight and lazy. And so,
especially wrestlers.
Yeah, totally. I mean, coming out of like, D1, you're just like, I'm done with this. But so I kind of went through that chapter, and then I hit a point where, I was just going through some personal things in my mid-20s, and I almost like a bit of an impulse move. I was like, forget it, I'm doing a marathon. And it was just like a decision I made in the spring of 2009. So I started looking for a marathon, and I couldn't find, I really wanted to do a trail marathon. So I couldn't find anything that was literally 26.2 miles, but I found one that was a 50K. So,
31.
Yep. So just a little bit longer than a true marathon. So I signed up for it, close to where I grew up, and had an awful experience. Like, it was the worst. My IT band blew up. it was brutal. So I got done with that, barely finished it. I was like, all right, I'm done with this, idea of ultra marathons. And then I think it was, when did we do Lean Horse? It wasn't the next year. We did a 50 miler together.
South Dakota.
Yeah. And that was, you were based in Rapid City. That might've been the next year, like 2010.
Yeah.
And 50 miles, and you worked me up to it, and I was like, all right, fine, I'll do this thing. And same thing, I got done with it, and I was like, this is the worst.
Yeah, because it was super hot.
It was brutal.
I think I was borderline heat stroke there.
Yeah.
Like crazy hot, just brutal.
Yep. And you had digestive issues. I had just a killer headache. It was, super exposed, flat for most of it. So then I took the next year off, 2011. I married Erica, and so took that summer off. 2012, I got the itch to do something, and I did another 50 miler in northern Minnesota, and similar grind, but I finished it. Felt like I got done, and I had this weird feeling of, extreme pain. It was, I might have finished it close to 12 hours. So it was not an impressive, bout, but I was hooked. Something, and I can't explain. Like, I was like, this is my tribe. This is my thing. As horrible as I felt, it somehow hooked me. And then the next year was my first 100 miler. So we can kind of unpack that, but you were a huge part of that.
Yeah.
Stepping into that 100 miler, because it's such a big game changer difference from 50.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so I think, we talk about the journey to the 100-mile, and I think a lot of stops along the way. I know for me, one of the things that I've enjoyed over the years, maybe not enjoyed, but the 100-miler, like, it just breaks you down in a way that's just so different and so unique in a way that a 50K or even a 50 miler can't do. Hold on. What's up, girl? Bye.
Bye, baby bunny. Yes.
Oh, good night. All right. We'll see if we keep that. But that's why we generally try to record early in the morning before the kids get up. But we had technical difficulties. So the 100-miler, man, just breaks you down in a way that just even 50K 50-miler doesn't. And I think there's something special about that. And I think there's just so much that you can learn through that process, and you learn about yourself, and you have all these highs and these lows, and usually though the course of 100 miles, like it's multiple. So I'm just kind of curious, your thoughts on just what keeps bringing you back to those, because you've done 5 or 6.
I finished 5. I've done Bighorn once, Superior 4 times, Superior 100-miler 4 times, and then I DNF'd at Bighorn.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess what keeps me coming back, I mean, it's a pinnacle event that I focus on. Try to do one every year. So since 2009, roughly, I've tried to do an ultra marathon, and particularly once I focused on the 100-miler, it's been like an annual kind of capstone event. So I focus my training on it. It's it's a big mountain. Oh, Run Rabbit Run was another one. That's I guess. So like it's this big event that I'm focused on for the training for the year, but there's something, I don't know, it's almost like a pilgrimage event where you're alone by yourself for a day and a half through like a cauldron of a pain train, I call it, it's this weird, like, it's an opportunity to all that solitude to both accomplish something amazing, stretch your mind and body and spirit just to the limit, and also kind of like I use it as a annual like taking stock of my life kind of in some ways. So it's turned into a super important annual ritual for me. But it's, I don't know, there's something, can't put my finger on exactly what's the magnet. It's like a feat that I have to keep pushing for, so there's something, there's an itch there that I want to keep scratching. And it doesn't get any easier. That's maybe part of the appeal. It's like every 100-miler is different, even if it's the same event. Like
many conditions and weather and just a lot of factors involved.
That's the biggest thing, is like, it's just an enormous test. And I've showed up, like, trained super well, ready at the starting line. I've also, like, last summer was just brutal. I barely finished, and everywhere in between, kind of feeling prepped or not. Just like, how's this going to work out?
So I think it's definitely a roller coaster ride. And so, for those listening or watching, we ran a 50-miler together, as Josh talked about, in South Dakota. And then we ended up meeting up for the Superior 100 in Minnesota in 2012-ish, something like that, 2013. And that was kind of like a last minute thing. I called you up, hey, I might come up, and it was on a Sunday. I, like, on a whim, tried to get into the race and managed to talk the race director to let me in, although I don't think I was supposed to talk about that. So disregard what I said.
Redact that.
I redact that. And anyway, so I got in, I called Josh, or we texted, and I said, hey, I might come up. So bought my tickets on Sunday. I think I flew up there like Wednesday. We drove all the way up to Duluth and raced. And man, I was just it was brutal for me. Like I was training, but not for that kind of race. And then I was in a grind in terms of a job. So just exhausted, we laugh about, I was tired by like hour 2, like felt like I was sleepwalking. Right. But one of the things that I've observed over the years with you in the way that you approach these is that I feel like your mental resiliency is just incredibly strong. Like, you go in with the mindset, like, I'm going to finish this, and for me, I always go into races like, I don't know, hemming and hawing and like, maybe, I hope. And it's usually, for me, it's not until that final like 15, 20 miles, 80, 85, 90 miles, where I finally like flipped the switch. I'm like, I'm going to finish this race. And then so kind of, I'm curious, like how you manage to approach something that's in our minds, like such a big endeavor, and having that mental resiliency to say like, dude, I'm going to finish this thing, and really not waver or doubt that.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of it is, well, there's a lot of aspects to that. My approach to training is a little, I don't know if it's unorthodox, but I don't put a ton of miles in per week. I don't do like training 100 milers, or even, I won't even do like a 50 miler leading up to a big one. I'm convinced that like I'm better off under training and hitting, I try to hit 3 or 4, at least 30-mile runs leading up to it. And the key being, at a 30-mile run, you're going to hit a low point.
Yeah.
Mentally, emotionally, you get broken, with especially when you're by yourself.
And you do solo, or you're out running through the night is when you set yours up.
Try to make it tough, like not great conditions and a lot of climbing.
Yeah.
So I have a state park near where I live now. It's a grind. And so the idea being like at least monthly, 3 or 4 times I'm going to some dark places that I got to work through.
Yeah.
And then like, you can't replicate that with, 3 10-milers on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah.
You got to like face the fire and work through it. And so part of it is like, it's almost like stress inoculation, a little bit of going through that. No matter how many 30-milers I've done, I know it's going to be dark and tough, and I'm going to hit this like physical pain or just the grind, and I'm going to work through it. And so that gives me confidence that like, I remember distinctly in Steamboat Springs for Run Rabbit Run, I'm sitting there at the base, and the initial climb is like, I think it's like 4,000 feet up. So you're sitting at the base of the ski hill looking up, and you're in the heart of the Rockies. Like, talk about a place to be intimidated. But you have that confidence because of, hey, I've been to some dark places, training and worked through it. So that's a big part of it, is showing up like confident. But then the coping, there's a lot I could unpack with how I cope through the run that helps just maintain that confidence through, so a couple keys that I focus on, like I break down the race and trick my brain into just smaller chunks. Like, hey, I'm going to the next aid station. I'm not really doing and rationally you're like, yeah, I'm doing a 100-mile run, but emotionally and everything else is like, I just got to get to Sanju Lake, midway through Superior 100. You're in the grind. I just got to get to Sanju. I'm gonna refresh, fill my water.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Sanju, yeah. I remember rolling in. And, so breaking that down. Yeah, because that's, for me, that's just an area that I've just always struggled in. And I think one of the things that I've been reading different books. I meant to look it up before we started this, but so we both have read How Bad Do You Want It by Matt Fitzgerald, and he talks a lot about things to think about through these ultra endurance types of events. Trey Free wrote a book. It's called Pushing North, I believe, and he's a combat controller, retired, and now he's done the Appalachian Trail through hike. I think he just did the Colorado Trail twice for the second time. One of the things he talks about is like expectation management, which I think is really interesting. And I think maybe that's part where I always struggled was, you remember me and my card, right? I'd have like my checkpoints and my worst case time, and this is when I need to be in and be out to beat the cutoff. And when I was reading that, I realized, or listening to it, that almost for me is like this double-edged sword, because I have the cutoff time that I got to beat, and then I have like a best case time. But it's like, no matter what, I'm always panicking because I'm like, I'm behind my best case time or my work, And it puts these like this stressors on me that I think really just because, you know, like the hard part or for a slow person like me is you always feel like you're chasing the cutoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this added burden of stress where you're just like underlying, like, dude, I hope I'm, you know, I think I could finish it if I had enough time.
Yeah.
And so I think expectation management, and then I think for you, like making yourself go to those places that are very painful, probably emotionally more than anything.
Yeah.
You know, you're just tired. You're in the middle of the night in the woods. Oftentimes you're alone. You get freaked out. You know, and that's an area I think of real growth, not just from an ultra marathon, but I think life in general is like putting yourself in a position where you make yourself face those fears.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's in running, whether it's in life, whether it's in the job, whatever it may be. But like you said, stress inoculation, just becoming more comfortable in those situations, I think is just a great thing.
Yeah. A big part of that for me, like a shaping event, was my first time at Bighorn in Wyoming, where I DNF'd, and I came into Jaws, which is the 50-mile aid station.
Turn around.
Which is like a death camp. You go through there, and I mean, it's a big tent. They got great aid there, and a lot of people drop. And I walked in just like wobbly on my feet. I'd already given up kind of mentally like 6 miles before, so just get to Jaws and I'm dropping out.
Yeah.
You know? And the way that race goes is it's almost, I think it's a 20-mile incline up to Jaws. And then you turn around, so that's halfway part. It's a point to point, or out and back. And so your next 20 are downhill, and you're coming out of that tent with full belly. You know.
Yeah.
I came in there like I had at least 4 hours to just recoup, rehydrate. My now brother-in-law was there, ready, geared up to run with me. And I just sat down and my eyes were all wobbly, and Erica looked at me, and she's like kind of pushing me like, are you sure you want to drop? I'm like, I'm done. I'm not getting up from this chair, you know?
Yeah.
And it just like, I dropped. And I analyzed that afterwards. Like, what made me drop? I had so much in my favor. I had a pacer, great aid. I had a downhill stretch. Yeah. It was a super muddy, rainy. I went through a hailstorm on that stretch. I mean, it was brutal, but it came down to discomfort.
Yeah.
Like I was tired of being uncomfortable. And this was, I want to say this is 2017 or 2016. And so I went on this quest, and part of it was that book, like learning about coping mechanisms and How Bad You Want It has some great ideas in there. But I thought about, okay, how do I get used to discomfort? Because we live in such a, like, oh my gosh, you got comfort all around us all the time, you know? Working an office job, like live in a nice house. Like I don't have a lot of, so I landed on taking a cold shower every morning, and like ain't no warm, it's cold all the way. And so I've been doing that since like 6 or 7 years, every day, as cold as I can get. And it's like, and it sucks every morning. There isn't like, oh,
just never get used
I'm
to
callous to this. It's cool. No, every time I'm like, you know, I just want to go, but it's like this daily ritual, this daily habit of a little bit of discomfort. And I know I'm saying that from a place of privilege. Like, you know, I go through the grind in life. I know many people who are like, yeah, I've got discomfort all around me. I get that.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to like choosing the hard path, and I'm again a very minor discomfort of like a couple minutes under cold water. But that's one of these, like, I don't know, it's a bit of a, you ask about kind of the mental side of it. It's, hey, I'm gonna suffer for like 30 plus hours and just get used to it. You know, it's this kind of daily dose of a little suffering that then you get thrown in the starting line of a 100-miler. You're like, yeah, I'm good. You know? So anyway, that's definitely something, kind of stress inoculation, that I've embraced, that's helped a lot.
Yeah. So that it made me think about, so my last attempt at a 100-miler was May of 2019, no, 2018, the Cruel Jewel 106 in Georgia, North Georgia. A lot of vertical. It was hot and humid. I mean, it was cooler, but it was late May in Georgia, so still, to me, warm and humid. And that's another one. I think I texted you while I was out there, and I was contemplating already quitting at mile 13, I think, And man, when I look back on that, because that was really my last attempt at a 100-miler, so 18. So that's public math, 5-6 years ago, something like
5
that.
years, yeah.
And so I remember having a battle through some of that, and then, dealt with the torrential downpour in the middle of the night, and it's just devastating, just beat down. And I remember texting Alicia, like she's camping with my 2 kids at the time, trying to get some sleep in the middle of the night, and they're going to see me in the morning. And I'm like, whining and moaning about, and I remember her like, if you want, I'll come pick you up, just tell me what you want to do.
Yeah.
And then I kept going for a while, and I eventually ran out of time at mile 80. So kind of really slogged through that night and really into the next night. So I think 36 hours, I think, is when I finally ran out of time. And I think through that, though, part of it I would consider like quitting by action towards the end, like still moving, but I knew like, bro, you're not moving fast enough. And I kind of just accepted that. But I remember that being part of my mentality, was like, I just can't fathom having to go hard for another 12 hours, is because it was a 48-hour cutoff, and I would have been like right at the tail end of that, right? So it was I think a noon start. So it's like, made it through the night,
hot and humid
the next day. It's noon. I've been going for 24 hours, make it to midnight basically the following night. But that idea of just like, man, I can't stomach this idea of having to continue to press on for another 12 hours. And so I in my mind, quit by action, and I haven't been back to attempt the 100 miles since. At some point, maybe I'll go back to Cruel Jewel. I'm not sure, because I think to add insult to injury on that race, I got just heinous poison ivy, like all over my legs. I mean, I remember the next 2 weeks, I'd be like putting cream on my legs in my uniform, and people would be looking at me and like in the office and like, what are you doing? Like, it was rough. Like it was, I think I get real bad reactions to poison ivy. But something I just kind of look at, maybe as we kind of pivot a little bit here from the application, if you want to call it, from pursuing these ultra marathons, but even to life. And so looking back and kind of what I wrote in that experience, I think I realized like part of me was really just emotionally, spiritually, physically, like just wore out. Like I think I remember, so I used to type up these race reports, after, and just talk about what happened and what's going on. And I remember I wrote something and I think I sent this to you maybe a year ago. But I wrote something to the extent of like, I sat there and I just felt like such a loser and such a failure. And like, I didn't even care. I remember sitting at that aid station in the middle of the night, getting rained on, and just like, I'm just a pathetic loser. Like I'm mentally just so weak. And I was like so mad at myself, but at the same time, like, I don't even care. And I think that was really for me an indicator of like where I was at in my spiritual life, emotionally, just really struggling. And that kind of launched me into a follow-on assignment where I was deployed for a year, and man, that was like where I kind of hit rock bottom. So I think these races are really great metaphors to life. And then at the same time, I'm like, it's like this having to recognize like maybe when you're out of balance, in life, in your marriage, in your faith or whatever. And it's sometimes I think that's a challenge.
Totally. Well, I mean, there's this dynamic that happens every 100-miler for me. And I mean, you just kind of described the same thing, where you're throwing yourself a pity party, and it can get pretty ugly, like, and to someone on the outside, like, it probably looks like a bit of a clown show. Like, you're the one that it's your idea to do this stupid event. And you're moping and groaning, and I get I do that quite a bit in life in general too,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, under some pressure, going through some hard times, some stress.
Feel sorry for yourself.
Yeah, totally. And I fail at this more than I succeed, but I try to follow this idea of like looking at the stars.
Yeah.
And there's some key moments in my life where I've literally done that, and it's just completely shuts down the pity party. So literally, you know, in the pressure cooker, like you're at a night aid station, and step outside and like look at the stars and pause for a second, and you know, it completely shifts your perspective, right? Or, you know, I was just at the Grand Canyon. It's a similar feel of like, I'm so minuscule compared to this enormous, vast canyon, right? And there's something powerful there that I draw on. Again, I, you know, fail more than I succeed at this, but like that, hold on, I like, this isn't all about me. And you tend to get that way in a 100-mile event, or in life where like, you know, we're both dads of three busy kids. We got, you know, great wives that like, and jobs that are, there's just a lot going on, right? A lot of activity, a lot of chance for stressors. And for me, my orientation toward like myself and being inward focused, it needs that snap reset. Like step outside literally and pause and look like, man, I'm not the center of the universe. I'm not that big a deal, you know? And it takes that, like, for me, I've found it's something like that to switch out of the moaning and groaning and the self-centered, you know, pity party. But
and that's so that idea of kind of being external to you. I mean, that's something we were just talking about the other day, you know, and something that my wife and I have really been wrestling through in a good way. But I think in life and kids and family and sports and everything that's going on, where I think it's very easy to become inward focused, family focused. You know, I got to make sure that we're doing well, and I got time for the kids and the wife. But I think there's definitely goodness in looking external to your family, to yourself, looking to the community, looking for ways that you can kind of focus on something other than just what you need or what your family needs. And I think definitely applications as well in terms of faith, you know. And so one of the things that we talked about a year ago with your dad is really what he's doing in terms of discipling and spending time. I think you said he's up to about 50 wrestlers every week, you know, three different colleges, right? Making the rounds, discipling, like pouring into people. And that's, you know, that's just really something that's been on my heart for a while now, is this idea of getting outside of yourself and investing in something that's bigger than you, and big, you know, really investing in something that has eternal significance. And so that's just kind of really one of the things that we're, as a family, you know, thinking through and kind of praying through right now. So yeah, I think that's interesting, kind of just tying that to your approach, even getting out of that like wallowing pity party, you know, when you're riding the pain train.
No, it makes me think like tying it to faith. I mean, we're definitely in the season of like doing the mundane daily grind well. And Eric and I talk about that quite a bit, just how to be consistent, how to just keep our heads on straight. And it's in the small stuff, you know. And I think tying this to what that looks like in a 100-miler is when you're, you know, you go through a full sun cycle and you hit really painful moments, and like you're not thinking about the finish line all that. At least I don't think about the finish line until maybe 10 miles out or something, you know, because mile 60 you're like, when's this gonna stop? You know? But like what makes the difference is, and I've heard this mantra quite a bit, of relentless forward motion. It's boring and mundane. It's like, you know, and this is, I think, my downfall sometimes, the amount of information I can try to take in. So the card idea that you had, that's my first 100-miler with you.
Mm-hmm.
I still do that.
Mm-hmm.
But because you have to have a strategy, it's you can't just kind of show up.
John Wayne it.
A 50-miler, you can kind of just muscle through, but same time, you can get wrapped up in all this information, and really, it's like you don't have to be that fancy. Like, stay hydrated.
Yeah,
eat. is a game changer. You have to eat and just keep going forward.
Move.
And like, in our stage of life, at least where I'm at now, it's like the difference is in the small stuff. How am I showing up to this meeting with my coworkers? Am I all haggard and stressed out, and I'm gonna say something I'm gonna regret, or put my foot in my mouth because I'm not calm and being humble and direct in my communication? Or get done with a stressful workday, and my youngest daughter is climbing all over me. How am I going to react? It's like the mundane stuff is actually the most important aspect of living out my faith. And it doesn't, like, I look at the way my parents have lived. They've lived incredible lives and reached, thousands of people with the gospel, and literally my mom included, and my dad has traveled quite a bit, but the two of them have just changed people's lives. And I look at that, I'm like, how do I live up to that? And I flipped that. Like, it isn't about me living up to a pinnacle life of faith like my parents and so many other, examples that you and I both know. I'm in my current situation. My first calling is to my wife and my kids, and like the mundane, boring stuff. And so, ironically, like the 100-miler, as big of a pinnacle event as it is, like I talk about, it's also this, like, come down to it, ain't fancy. Like,
it's just kind of a rhythm of life that you enter into, and so when you're talking about the grind and the little things, a couple ideas popped in my mind. One, I still use the mantra that you came up with, the idea of small things done slowly over a long period of time. And so I think about that often, even now, like entering into the season of, really, what I wrote down in my notebook this morning, thinking about it, is I said, like, committing to the grind, because I'm a feelings person, right? I'm like a probably highly emotional, like, feelings guy, and I love just all that's involved in the work up to a big race or big whatever. And we've talked about this before, where, like, when I'm out there, like, I want to be inspired by the mountains. I want to see the Rockies, and I want to be up there in the sunsets, and all that is great. Like, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think I texted you probably a couple months ago now, but kind of in this, even in my faith sometimes, where it's like, my background more maybe from a charismatic Pentecostal, the worship is always extravagant, and and there's a lot of feelings involved. And again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. I think there's a lot of goodness in that. But, but at the same time, like, in the faith, like, it's not always exciting. And like you just talked about your parents, like, committing to discipling people and going into closed nations like your parents and your family did in the 80s and 90s. Like, there's a lot to that that's not exciting per se. And so when I was thinking about maybe at some point, if I, work up enough courage to go after another 100, because I'm stuck on number 4. I think I've DNF'd my last 2 attempts at the 100 to try to get to number 5. But I'm like, maybe I just need to commit to the grind and get out there and do one that's feasible, reasonable, based on my schedule and ability to train. And it's like, hey man, you're not out there to see the birds and the sun and the sunset and the mountains. Like, just get out there and commit to the grind and get it done. Like, because that's the goal that you have. That's what you want to do. And there are times to be inspired and motivated. Like when I did that half Ironman this summer, like, that was a breath of fresh air for me. Partly, I think, because I didn't have this massive thing looming over me come race morning. I'm like, sweet, 1.2 mile swim, 56 mile bike, half marathon, wham bam. I can't remember my time now. I don't want to inflate it. It was under, I think it was like 7 hours or something, maybe a little less, a little more. But so I felt like motivated and inspired and happy, and all that was good. And so that's where I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll just do a rails to trails, like completely uninspiring, completely boring. It's a grind, but man, commit to it and just do it. And I think there's lessons to be learned in that. And so that's one of the many things I've been thinking about in faith as well, is like, there's moments of high times and encouraging times. But I think to really just dig in and take those daily steps of investing and pouring into other people, like that's going to come with setback. That's going to come with disappointment. That's going to come with the potential to get offended, or you invest in someone and then they just, we were just talking about a friend of mine that, just goes cold for like years at a time. You have this great conversation and I'm like, dude, I'm so pumped up about that. And then you maybe hear from them 3 years later, and it sucks, but that's okay. You kind of just keep pressing forward, and making the most out of what you have.
That saying, that came from a book, actually. I got to find that book. It's something like experiencing Jesus through the five senses or something like that. But accomplishing small things slowly over a long period of time, and the whole premise being, like, we're bombarded with do big, succeed in every aspect of life, go out and kill it in your career, have a perfect marriage, flawless kids, like, big house, big bank account, all that stuff. And we're really challenged, if we're honest with ourselves, in who we should model our faith after, and not just Jesus, but the long line of saints, the prophets, like early church, and even recent history. Like the ones we really should model our life after did small things, slowly over a long period of time. And that's why I feel like a bit of imposter syndrome when I talk about the 100-miler, because when you look at like my daily workout regimen, it's a struggle to just be consistent. So I look at Erica is way more disciplined daily with a workout, and our college coach, right, he had his 4.2 or
4.23, some like odd number
daily plod around
6 days a week.
Rain or shine, he was out there. My dad's the same way. Like, he always gets some sort of lift or a sauna or something, and very active physically. And it's just, it's like mundane and boring. Like, I just, I want to go out and do the big thing. Well, life is actually in the small, boring stuff. And that's where I feel, again, like that's maybe convicted most in that direction, to be more successful in the seemingly boring small stuff, because like, I can crank out 100-miler because I've done it before. Last year was proof of that. Like, I snuck in before the finish line, and my wife looked at me. She's like, this isn't what she said, but this is what I received. She's like, hey, that was kind of embarrassing. And she's right. Like, it was kind of pathetic showing, because I wasn't faithful in my training. I did a couple of those, like I talked about, those 30-milers, but I didn't show up in the mundane, boring stuff day in, day out. And that's where, to anyone who's like thinking, oh, I got to do 100-miler, like fine, that might be your path. But man, life is in the consistency, especially, again, like thinking about how we live a faithful life. I know many more people who have lived consistent lives that, man, I want to be like them, versus the famous, I don't know. It just seems to be a lot more baked into like the faithfulness day in, day out.
Yeah, because I mean, I would consider really off the top of my head a couple, heroes of the faith to me. Your dad and your parents being one of them, and then Gene and Francis, which the last, I think when I publish this episode, the last conversation I had was with Gene, and just that idea of enduring, faithful to endure, and looking at their lives where it's like this ongoing epiphany I keep having is those two as examples, those two families. It's like just showing up. He's been doing the Bible study at the Olympic Training Center for 20 plus years, showing up and ministering to and discipling and befriending and encouraging, and looking at what we talked about, the fruit of, I believe, the direct fruit of those the labor, their efforts is like at the highest levels wrestling, like some very, very strong, committed, bold believers, which is just awesome. Like, it's just so encouraging to see. And it's like, there's nothing inherently, exciting about leading a Bible study of 10 to 15 college wrestlers, or 10 guys consistently at the training center with some influx at times of other people. But it's like, you're not on YouTube with hundreds of thousands of views, and you're not on TV. And again, none of that I believe is inherently wrong, but it's just like, but for those two as an example, just showing up day in and day out and being faithful and committing to that, and just the fruit that yields, is just such a big encouragement to me.
Yeah.
So one of the things, let's see, I may read this because it's a little bit long, but I think it kind of ties in here. So been reading through Hebrews, and I've started or almost finished this book. It's called Holy Grit, by a guy named Chad Ragsdale. For those watching right here, it's a really fascinating book, and he's talking about this idea of resilience in your faith. And he's going through Hebrews, pulling out some really solid examples. But I was reading in Hebrews 11 this morning, and so you kind of bear with me, but it's just really encouraging. So I'm going to be reading in the ESV, and this is chapter Hebrews 11, starting at verse 32. But we're talking about, the heroes of the faith. And he says, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, in the dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should be made perfect." And so you read that, and it's just like, man, thinking about those examples, just like the endurance and that commitment to the faith and to the daily grind. And then just finishing up here in chapter 12, he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted." Right. And so, yeah, I read that, man, and it's just like, gosh, there's just so much like awesome examples of the faith, And so, yeah, we kind of started off by talking the 100-mile, because I think that is just one of the many things that we have in common and that you can learn from. But I think kind of moving, and maybe it's just a product of now, being over the hill, being 40, and you kind of, as I've been refining kind of that outlook on life over the last couple of years now, but it's like, man, like really want to make sure that what I'm pursuing is worthwhile, is worth the time, and how can you weave in your giftings and your talents and your passions in a way to really make a difference, an eternal difference.
Yeah, this morning the church lectionary reading was in Luke of a woman who is bent over, like hunched over, and Jesus was in the temple and or a synagogue, I guess. I'm not sure exactly if it's synagogue or the temple, but he healed her, and it was a Sabbath, of course, and the the elders like rebuked not Jesus, they rebuked the people. Said, "Hey, if you got ailments, you got 6 days to get healed. Sabbath. Don't do it Sabbath."
Yeah,
it was super passive aggressive, But I thought about like that, it's called kind of the Hall of Faith sometimes, Hebrews 11, and I also was thinking this morning, this woman like continued to show up probably in shame, the paralyzed, the paralytic who, humbled himself to be carried by his friends
up on the roof
to Jesus. Yeah. Or the woman who had been bleeding for
12 years,
12 years. Yeah. And touched the hem of Jesus' garment in faith. Those kind of people I think of as well, even as much as like these, heroes of the faith, because they got this little blip in scripture, right? But if you really unpack it and think and put yourself in that kind of honor shame culture where they're experiencing shame in their community, they've got the resilience for decades.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know who this Jesus rabbi is, but like there's something going on here. I'm gonna submit myself again to the outcast. Like I'm gonna just show up, and there's so kind of back to our theme of like the mundane stuff. Which I don't know. I wasn't expecting that to come out as much in this conversation, because you're talking 100 milers, and people have this like, I think, outsized idea of the feat. It's it is a big accomplishment, but at the same time, like, life exists in the faithful, mundane. Like, we may not attain these amazing feats of some of these people, the men and women that you just read about, but yet we're called and we follow an example in Christ of just faithful daily, the boring stuff too.
Yeah, and I didn't know exactly where this conversation would go either, but I also listened to a book recently. Oh man, I think it's called Getting Over Yourself. And he basically talks about the guy's name, Dean something. But he kind of talks about what he considers he calls it the new prosperity gospel. And there's a lot that that term in and of itself can be somewhat loaded, I think. But he kind of basically says this idea of like having this grand vision, and it's all about what I'm going to be able to accomplish, and kind of saying like that's what's crept into the church now, is like this oversized vision and version of me. Like it's all about me and what I can do for God. And it convicted me, and it challenged me in the idea of like there's nothing wrong with having a ministry or platform where maybe you do reach lots of people, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, like nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, it's just what we've been talking about, like being faithful with what we've been given, being faithful with the things that God has called us to do and has equipped us to do. And that may just mean, man, you're showing up consistently, and like you're talking about for training, like you show up every day consistent and you do what you're asked to do. And through that process, you can make a difference. And you may never achieve and attain and become someone that anyone really knows, other than, I believe, one day when you show up, in heaven, and you're going to get to see and meet these people of potential lives that you've impacted just by being faithful, doing the things that aren't always exciting, keeping in touch with the guy that needs encouragement, someone. I think about a couple of people that I try to keep up with. You meet them in church and then you don't see them for a while, and encouraging them or whoever it may be. And so that's really what I think I've been just meditating on for a while now, is this idea of, like, I think we all have to be careful not to get too caught up in, it's about God, but really it's like, hey, look at the things that I'm doing for God,
right.
And I've talked about this on this podcast a lot lately, versus the idea of Christ in me, Christ through me, and what God can do through me and with me, not what I can do for God.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, like, there's a related aspect to that of our faith is actually what it's marked by suffering. Like, we're called to suffer. And so if we're on a path of building ourselves up and, like, our own empire, we're kind of, we're fighting against the path, the way, and I think of resilience too. That resilience is not like, oh, I am resilient, I've arrived, I'm here, I'm good to go. I mean, I see this in people way further down the path of life than me, who are still struggling with, like, they still got, like, daily prayers are a struggle, fighting just, like, their own passions, and, like, they're still honing the discipline, and so I think suffering is a big part of our faith. It's not like something to avoid. Is actually part of the journey, And again, relating it to ultra marathons, that's, if you could sum up ultra marathon in one word, I'd probably pick suffering. It's the pain train, right? Like, and there's something about that keeps us from that dynamic you're talking about. Like, wait a minute, is this really just like a warped version of Christianity, where it's actually, like, it's really just about what I'm doing, what I'm accomplishing, and me, myself, and I, for with Jesus kind of in tow. That's actually, I think Christianity, for most of its history, has been marked by, like, asceticism and the spiritual disciplines and physical disciplines and fasting, and for that reason, to, like, remind us it's actually goodness in the suffering, and then also, when we're presented with suffering we don't choose, right? It's one thing to, like, skip lunch and, like, focus on your faith and fast for part of a day. It's another to be thrown into just a painful situation, or something that your kids are going through, or
you think about, I mean, on extreme end, obviously those in countries where people are heavily persecuted, where it's like, man, your faith costs something, costs a lot. And obviously people you read about throughout the Bible, just a lot there, a lot of things to consider. Well, cool, man. We're at where are we at now? Yeah, coming up right about the hour. So definitely have enjoyed the conversation. One I've been wanting to have for a while, and so when you were coming in, I figured, again, good opportunity to try out some new gear. Maybe do it in person, and just kind of talk through some of this, because I know we have a lot of communications via phone, throughout the weeks and the months. So, any closing thoughts that you have, or anything you want to leave here with those listening or watching?
No, I guess I'm just, I'm kind of soaking on this Yeah, I thought we were going to talk about 100-milers and how awesome they are and how awful they are.
Yeah, I tricked you.
There's something really, there's interesting about the conversation of like actually being faithful in the boring, mundane with, positive attitude. And man, there's a lot of branches we could go down into, like enthusiasm as an important part of enduring.
Mm-hmm.
But the faithfulness in the mundane, whether or not you're in a 100-miler or just
in life,
grinding through life, that's where I believe true life is. And that's, our salvation. Talk about the act of continuing being saved by Christ and how we're being reshaped. It's in that stuff.
Just enjoying the process. I think it's just one of those things where it's an ongoing thing. You have good days, good weeks, bad weeks. You're in a high, you're in a low, and just really trying to persevere through that. And I think probably by the end of this year, I want to just record an episode and just kind of reflect on 20 years that I've been a believer now. Turned 40 and it's always significant to me because now I'm kind of halfway, halfway in the sense of 20 years as a non-believer, 20 years as a believer, and just a lot of life and a lot of journey, a lot of failures, some successes along the way, is just really interesting to look back on, and reflect on. So I definitely want to spend a little bit of time doing that.
Yep.
So yeah, man, I think I had an idea maybe we would go a little bit down this route, but kind of just wanted to see, talking about some of these things and where it led us.
Yeah.
I'm just go ahead. You got something?
No, I mean, small stuff matters just like the big stuff.
Yeah.
I'll wake up and do some push-ups and air squats before I go to work.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like the faithfulness of a daily grind workout.
Yeah. I'm just looking through the old notebook here. Yeah. And so maybe as we close out, sometimes I say that like 3 or 4 times before we finish. So when I think about, as I've refined what I believe is just the mission for the Endure Training Center, which is, helping people to find and fulfill their purpose by developing a Christ-centered approach to life, leadership, and resilience. And maybe that's why I thought talking about the idea of resilience demonstrated through the 100-miler, like we might end up going down a little bit different path and talking more about faith, because I think, developing that Christ-centered approach, that mindset of, again, we're all gifted and talented in different ways, which I think is awesome. And so using that, but kind of looking through the lens of, man, I'm a Christ follower, and my goal and my desire is to accomplish the things that God has set before me and the things that he's asking me to do, and to be changed and challenged and sanctified through his word. And then using that as a way to, to approach, I think, life, leadership, and resilience is what I probably tend to talk about the most. And resilience being one of those key components that is just, it's an ongoing, it's an ongoing thing. It's a daily battle, and sometimes it's a daily decision. But it's a really important component, and something that we probably should really be paying attention to, and just looking for ways to develop that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I meant that in a good way. Like, the daily, the mundane, I mean, the resilience shows up there.
Yeah.
It's a pretty cool aspect. It's like, cool. Circle a date on the calendar for a 100-miler, get after it. But, wash your dishes tonight.
Yeah.
Like, do your chores.
Yeah. It makes me, I think it was Mark Twight years ago. He used to post stuff through Jim Jones is what it was called. I'm pretty sure it was Mark Twight. But he would talk about just basically the idea of, and he was a very interesting guy, very hardcore, I don't know. But but he's basically to the extent of like, yeah, I'm really not impressed when you brag about how you ran a below average time in a marathon with minimal to no training. And just this idea of like, but he was real big on paying your dues. Like, get out there, set a goal, train hard, show up, commit, grind it out, and do it. But yeah, it just always, I would read that, man, I would just crack up. You just imagine some guy brag about, oh yeah, I ran a 4-hour 30-minute marathon, I didn't even train, and in his mind's like, I'm not impressed. That's actually pathetic, to him. And some people might think that's great, but yeah, it's again going back to the process, and I think definitely training for some of these races, it's like the hard part is showing up and putting in the work. So all right, man, well, thanks again for joining, and hopefully we'll have some more conversations in the future.
Yeah, get some more dirt on our shoes on the trails.
Yeah, we're due to do a race together. Maybe I'll drag you out here and run around the trails with me.
I'm down.
The most boring, just like, oh, really? Out in the back, farmland, like, oh, look, I'm on the same trail and it hasn't changed in 50 miles. Yeah, and I'm going to turn around and go back the other way. Because at least when I did the graveyard, it was road race flat, but it was down the Outer Banks. So that was really cool. Scenery and stuff. So yeah, Rails to Trails is like my, nightmare scenario. But yeah, I'm like, that's what I've been thinking. Maybe I just need to sign up, commit, train, and just knock it out. And then maybe I can retire from the ultra marathon.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
All right, man. Well, guys, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you're encouraged and took something away from this. And so check back here soon, and we'll probably be wrapping up. I want to have a conversation about community with a good friend of mine. And then, like I said, probably do a little reflection here at the end of the year and just looking back on the last couple of years of this podcast, where I think it's going. And then, we'll see what the Lord has in store for us. So thanks for joining us. Take care.